The Holy Gospel breaks into our midst this morning according to St. Luke. But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again?" Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stopped, and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
O Holy One, open our eyes and hearts and ears to receive your good news, and then open our mouths to tell it. Amen. At the beginning of Lent, I invited people to fill out cards that say, "God, help me to empty myself of and fill me with." And here are the results of what we have prayed to be released from. Can you see what the most frequent request was? Well, say it. Anxiety. Anxiety. Who knew we were a congregation filled with anxiety? Which makes us a good representation of our country, and I imagine the world. One of our members, who is a doctor, said most of her patients complain about anxiety. Most of the parenting articles I have read over the last couple years talk about anxiety, the anxiety of parents about how to juggle everything, especially during COVID, but I'm not so sure that has dissipated. Young people are anxious about so many things. First, isolation, stuck at home, and then returning to school and back to people and being overwhelmed with 2 full schedules. People struggle with social anxiety, with how to be with other people. Some of us are anxious about global warming, changing weather patterns, how that will affect our children's future. COVID, of course, brought its own anxiety. Anxiety about getting sick, about others getting sick, about work, about masks, about people not masking. Is there anything that wasn't anxiety-producing? From going to the store, to being afraid to breathe in someone else's air, to anxiety about vaccines and about people not getting vaccines. Now church staff is just anxious about getting one of these bad colds that's going around. There was anxiety about not being able to visit someone in a nursing home or in the hospital, and then anxiety about visiting someone in a nursing home or hospital. Anxiety about traveling, about going to visit relatives, about worshiping in person, about worshiping in person with singing, about worshiping in person with singing and without mask. Each step along the way into our cocoons, and then now out of our cocoons has been a place of anxiety. Maybe like the butterfly coming out of the cocoon, it has been hard for us to open back up our wings, to feel free, to fly. Partly because it seems our wings are unfurling into a new world. Work has changed. People's relationship to work has changed. Inflation is rising. Gas prices are rising. There's ever the next COVID variant. And then Russia invades Ukraine. And we are anxious for Ukrainians, for the world, for peace, for who will be our political leaders. If you're a New Yorker after the Brooklyn shooting, you might have anxiety about stepping into a subway car. If I let myself, I could be anxious about worship, the very thing that's supposed to bring peace and joy. I could be anxious about who's going to come back to worship and who isn't. Maybe that's a shout out to those watching on live stream. How many bulletins to make for today's service, for all the services we had this week? How many bulletins should we make? I don't know. I hope we had enough. We can be anxious about falling ill, about a loved one falling ill, about losing our mobility, about growing old. And something we can all share anxiety about: death. Which is where we enter the gospel story today. The women and the disciples are in the midst of the anxiety that comes when a loved one dies. Though unlike in the Gospel of Mark, they are not anxious about who's going to roll away the stone from the entrance to the tomb. It's already been taken away. They come to anoint the body. It's a ritual that gives them something to do when they don't know what else to do. That's what rituals do. They hold us together. But Jesus' body is not there. I imagine that's where I would have gotten anxious, freaked out a bit. But instead of their anxiety increasing exponentially, the women are perplexed. I wonder what happened to the body. It seems to be a mixture of confusion and curiosity. But then there are the men in the dazzling clothes, and that they find terrifying, until the men give them a message as it were from beyond, a word that breaks into their terror, their anxiety, and their grief. Why do you seek the living among the dead? Do you not remember what he told you? He is not here. He is risen. What I'm struck by is how that was enough for them. I love the Gospel of Luke, but I was really struggling with the way that he tells the resurrection story. I wanted the story to have more drama, like to be like Matthew and have an earthquake, or like the Gospel of John with Jesus' appearance that Mary mistakes for a gardener. There's no excitement in this story. There's no Peter and John racing each other to see who's going to get to the tomb first. It's just a rather calm and matter-of-fact story about something that's not calm and matter-of-fact at all. The women do freak out, but just for a second, for that second, but once they're told to remember what Jesus said, they do remember, and their terror is gone. Peacefully, they return to the disciples to share their story, and they even seem unperturbed by the disciples who, except for Peter, decide that the women don't know what they're talking about. They say, it's an idle tale. The Greek root for that word, idle, is delirious. The women are dismissed as if they are hysterical with grief. But their anxiety, their grief, their fear, their terror, their confusion has been replaced by the deep peace that only God can give. So even the offensiveness of the disciples does not get to them. And I realized that that is the power of this story. Sometimes resurrection is like an earthquake, our world turning inside out, and sometimes we need something that monumental to break in and shake up the foundations of our lives. But most of the time, what we need and what we receive is what is offered here. Someone to remind us, like the men in dazzling clothes remind the women, remember. Remember what he told you. How often all of these things we named, anxiety, regret, despair, impatience, pride, scarcity, weakness, anger, blaming, control, self-criticism, toughness, how often these take control of our lives. All these things which the men in dazzling clothes would ask of us, why do you seek the living among the dead? These things do not bring life. They steal it away from us. They close us off to the expansive life that God desires for us, a life overflowing with their opposites: peace, hope, abundance, compassion, purpose, hope, strength, generosity, grace, beauty. These are all the things that you prayed to be filled with. We leave all these at the cross so that we can be filled with all of these. It is not, as we know, so simple a thing. And yet, in some ways, the resurrection story says that it is. Christ is risen as he said he would be. Life, love, grace, forgiveness, these are ours, and they do and they will have the last word. It's just in the midst of all those things on the crossboard, it sometimes doesn't feel like it. In the midst of all of those, we might forget, just like the women forgot, until the dazzling clothed ones showed up. But that, my friends, is what we are. We are the dazzling clothed ones, the ones who know the tomb is empty, the ones that remind each other. Remember, Christ is risen. We are ones clothed with the dazzling light of Christ. We are here to remind one another when we are looking for the living among the dead. Life is not here. Remember, Christ has been raised and you with him. His expansive life already given, the love of Christ freeing, filling, and flowing through us. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
And we, with him, have also been raised. In his name, amen.